Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. So today, we're tackling a topic that is, well, honestly surrounded by just a massive amount of noise, fear, and misunderstanding. We're talking about teen drug use. We're going to dismantle that kind of shallow public conversation and look at the systemic reality of what's actually happening here. We'll explore the underlying psychology, really understand why risks are uniquely high during adolescence, and ultimately figure out what kind of prevention actually works when we finally move beyond the buzz. Let's get right into it. You know, when we hear about a teenager using substances, the immediate reaction is almost always to ask, why would they make such a bad choice? We naturally tend to frame it as mere defiance, right? Or a moral failure, or even strictly a criminal issue. But is it really just a bad choice? Well, if you've ever interacted with a teenager, you know their world is entirely different from ours. So the short answer is a resounding no. Here's the core idea you really need to hold on to. Adolescence is not just a smaller version of adulthood. The brain, the social pressures, the environment, they are completely different. If we treat this issue like it's just adults making poor decisions, we entirely miss the whole system underneath it. Okay, so here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Beyond a simple bad choice. 2. The brain under construction. 3. Function instead of rebellion. 4. The pathway to habit. And 5, prevention that actually works. All right, let's dive into this with section 1, beyond a simple bad choice. First things first, we need to shift our paradigm from blame to empathetic understanding. A drug isn't just a chemical existing in a vacuum. It's a chemical entering a body with a highly specific brain state, a certain tolerance level, and a really unique emotional situation. Think of it kind of like food. An incredibly spicy meal can feel enjoyable to one person, painful to another, or totally overwhelming, right? It all depends on who's eating it, how hungry they are, and whether they're used to spice. The food is exactly the same, but the experience absolutely is not. And this brilliantly illustrates why teen drug use is the use of a substance in a brain and a social world that are both actively under construction. The substance matters, for sure, but so does the adolescent starting point. This builds a literally stark contrast between what we hear and what is actually happening. The public conversation is noisy. It relies heavily on fear, blame, moral failure, and criminalization. But the reality? The reality is a complex, interconnected system driven by developmental timing, that deep human need for belonging, emotional coping, and systemic vulnerabilities, things like trauma, stress, or intense academic pressure. When you look at the reality side of things, the behavior suddenly starts to make sense in a much, much deeper way. To really grasp this, we can use a pretty simple 6-piece mental model to anchor our understanding. Think of these as interconnected parts. You have the substance, what the chemical actually does, development, how judgment and reward sensitivity are changing, emotion, what the teen is trying to feel or maybe stop feeling, peers, how belonging shapes their behavior, pattern, whether the use is isolated or becoming a habit, and vulnerability, the underlying pressures that made the substance attractive in the first place. When you understand these 6 pieces, whether you're a parent or mentor, you realize the behavior isn't random at all. It is entirely understandable. Which brings us to a really critical question. If the substance is just one piece of a 6-part puzzle, why does that exact same substance affect a 15-year-old so differently than a 35-year-old? Well, fun fact, the human brain isn't fully baked until around age 25. To answer why that matters, we have to look under the hood. So let's explore that biological hardware in section 2, the brain under construction. The absolute crucial point here is that a teen brain is not a bad or broken brain. Actually, it's highly optimized for learning, exploration, and social sensitivity. Picture a car with an incredibly powerful engine, but the brakes are still being tuned in the shop. That car can move incredibly fast, but it tends to surge before it can safely stop. In a teenager, the systems reacting to quick rewards and emotions are that powerful engine, while the prefrontal cortex, the brakes that handle long-term planning and impulse control, is still playing catch-up. Because of this setup, high learning plasticity creates a really unique vulnerability. The adolescent brain learns patterns incredibly quickly during this window, meaning relief from a substance can easily become a repeated habit. And when you factor in reward sensitivity, because teenagers are literally wired to strongly notice novelty and pleasure, substances feel much more compelling to them. This isn't a lack of intelligence. It's simply that emotion and the immediacy of a fast reward easily outrun their slower developing capacity for reflection. Moving right along to section 3, function instead of rebellion. We make this massive mistake of imagining teen drug use mainly as defiance. But first use, it's rarely about sticking it to the adults. Instead, it's highly ordinary and intentional. It's used to feel less anxious, to fit in with peers, reduce boredom, manage sadness, or numb something uncomfortable. It begins as a solution. Think of it like tapping a cracked wall to stop a leak. To the teenager, it seems to work for a little while, providing real but temporary relief, even as the underlying damage is quietly growing. And how does this tie into peers? We always hear about peer pressure, the whole idea of a kid aggressively pushing a pill on another kid. But that view is way too small. We need to reframe that into belonging. For a teen, a substance is often a social ticket. It's a way to avoid being excluded. Think of a group chat where everyone knows the inside jokes. If you don't know the code, you'll say almost anything to stay included. For many teens, substance use acts exactly like that necessary code word for belonging. So what happens when that code word gets used over and over? Let's look at Section 4, the pathway to habit. A single experiment is definitely not the same as a pattern of use. The real issue we're looking at is trajectory. It often starts with curiosity, then moves to repeated habit, transitions into a way of coping, and eventually hardens into dependence. Think of a footpath in dry ground. One person walking it once barely leaves a mark, but if they keep taking that exact same route, a clear, deep track forms, and eventually it becomes completely automatic to follow. The brain learns the routine, and the behavior starts to feel effortless. This is exactly why early intervention matters so much. You want to interrupt the pattern before the brain turns that simple footpath into a paved highway. But it's important to remember that not all substances carve out that path at the exact same speed or in the same way. Substances are like different tools in a workshop. A hammer and a soldering iron don't shape material the same way, right? Their risks differ. Intoxication speed, how long the impairment lasts, and how easily it can be used in secret, all of these change the risk level dramatically. Context totally dictates the risk. For instance, a substance with a massive, rapid intoxication speed hacks that reward center way faster than one that builds slowly. We really have to stop flattening all drug use into one single category. All right, so how do we translate this understanding into reality? Section 5, prevention that actually works. Let's anchor ourselves on this incredibly powerful quote from our sources. Prevention cannot be a slogan, it has to work with the system, not against it. Abstract, fear-based messages telling teens to just say no fail constantly. And why is that? Because if a substance is acting as a fast, reliable solution for a teenager to feel calmer or more accepted, an abstract warning about danger simply cannot compete with that massive, immediate emotional payoff. So what actually sticks? Well, real prevention works by reducing the need the substance is trying to meet, like, say, giving them better tools for stress. It works by reducing the opportunity for it to become normal. It works by increasing the cost of repetition early, setting boundaries that make taking that footpath much harder to do. And critically, it works by strengthening protective relationships, ensuring a teen's sense of belonging doesn't depend on engaging in risky behaviors. Connection and stress management matters so much more than just lecturing. Ultimately, we have to stop looking at this as a mystery or just slapping a moral label on it. It is a predictable human response under very specific pressures. So I'll leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought. As you interact with this topic going forward, stop asking, why would a teen do this? Instead, ask, what need is being met? What system is shaping their choice? And what would make the healthier option easier for them? When we foster that kind of true, empathetic understanding, that is when real prevention begins. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the right questions, and I'll catch you next time.